Welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, where hunters new and old come to learn and find inspiration from stories of hunts gone by. Everyone is welcome to enjoy the outdoor way of life, and there is no better time to start than right now. So let's head into the great outdoors with your host, Dylan Ray.
All right, guys, welcome to Bear Archery's Hunting 101 podcast, as always, presented by our good friends over at ScentLok. As you gear up for whitetail season, we're in our Deer 101 series. As you're gearing up for whitetail season, I would highly recommend you to look at ScentLok. Inside of their BE1 toolkit, they've got everything you need to get from early season to late season and tools that are really just functional for the bow hunter. So I would highly recommend you to check out the BE1 toolkit. I would highly recommend you to check out all of ScentLok's line, because in my opinion, what sets them apart is their carbon technology for maximum odor absorption, which is really what's going to give you that upper hand in the whitetail woods. So I would highly recommend you check out our friends over at ScentLok. I am joined by Brian Grossman of the National Deer Association. Brian, how are you, man?
Doing well, man. How are you?
Man, I am absolutely wonderful. We're getting close to deer season. I leave in about 3 weeks for elk. And so we're in that crunch time. I just got done shooting my bow. Of course, it's 102 here in Kansas, so that sucked.
Yeah.
But just got done shooting about 5 minutes before we jumped on the phone. And so we're just in that exciting time, man, that exciting period of gearing up.
Absolutely.
Now, you are the communications manager there at the NDA, which, if you guys don't know, that's the National Deer Association, previously known as QDMA, Quality Deer Management Association. The reason I say that is because I want to ask you a question about that. But how'd you get to the National Deer Association? What journey took you there?
Yeah, it's kind of an odd deal, I guess. My background's actually wildlife management. I got a wildlife degree from Murray State University there in Western Kentucky, and did that for, heck, I guess about 15 years. A lot of public land management for both the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. But along the way, I was interested in doing some freelance writing, outdoor writing. I've been doing that for a little while. For years, since I first discovered the internet, back in college, and I've been messing with websites and doing that part of it. Was active on social media. So kind of in the background while I was doing my day job, doing wildlife management, I'd been learning all these kind of communication skills, online communication, and the opportunity come along to work for the what was at that time the Quality Deer Management Association, and I jumped on it. It was right at, I guess, this month that'll be seven years ago. So I've been
Awesome.
Been with them ever since, and enjoying it thoroughly.
Well, let me just say, I've heard nothing but good things about you. I called one of my friends, Brian Murphy, which we don't have much good things to say about him, but I called Brian and I'm like, hey, dude, is this a guy I need to get with? And he's like, oh, absolutely, 100%. Which, speaking of Brian, so today's episode, we're in episode 2 of our Deer 101 series. Brian, the premise behind this 9-part series is to teach somebody from the ground up how to be a whitetail hunter. I also want to have this as a tool set that people can take and help teach people how to be a whitetail hunter. So if there's a father out there listening, they can take kind of the dumbed down version of whitetail hunting that we're going to portray, and then teach it to their kids, teach it to a kid in their neighborhood or whatever. So that's kind of the premise behind this. This is episode 2. We're going to talk about scouting, how, when, why, tools to scout with, how to implement your scouting. And then next episode 3, we're actually going to talk about where to hunt. So you've scouted the property. Now where do you hunt? And that's where Brian Murphy comes in.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about how to implement our scouting tools into where to hunt. So I'd highly recommend you to jump in next week to episode 3 as a follow-up to this one when we talk about scouting, because next week we're going to talk about how to implement those scouting outings into where to actually hunt. So Brian, let's start by when to scout. Now that's very general, because, I believe scouting starts last season. But I do want to talk about that though. I want to kind of paint this picture. You're scouting a property that you have history with on one hand, and then on another hand, we're scouting a property we've never seen before. We have no idea what's on the property. Maybe we just gained access to it. Maybe it's private land, public ground, but either way, we don't have any history with the property, because I believe that plays a difference in the way that I scout. If I have a 10-year history with the property, I might not have to start from the ground up. I know where the deer bed, I know where. So let's dive into kind of each of those categories, a new piece of ground and an old piece of ground. But when does your scouting start?
Well, kind of like you said there, I guess really, I love the whole scouting process. Have been for forever, but last 4 or 5 years, I've really gotten into it even more so than ever before, to the point to where, man, I almost enjoy it, and I say almost, as much as the hunt itself. And so it's really a year-round deal. I do a lot of public land hunting, and I'm fortunate to have access to quite a bit of acreage here in the short drive from where I live. So there's always property to be scouted. So really, I guess the start is like you said there. I'm starting as soon as the season ends, preparing for that next season. And a lot of times that's but I like that time of year because everything's still pretty fresh and visible.
Yeah.
Not only do I still have those memories fresh in my mind of what I seen during deer season, how the deer behave, where they came from, where they went, that kind of information that'll help me as I get out there and scout. But the sign's still visible too. Those rubs
Absolutely.
are easier to find. The scrapes are still visible out there. The trails are beat down, during that winter time of year. So
sometimes even more so.
Yeah.
Like if you look at right now, if I start trying to scout a property right now in Kansas, it's incredibly dry. The ground is bone hard. But if I'm doing it in winter, there's still snow melting off. It's muddy. It's nasty. I can see tracks in the creek bank perfectly. I can see where they're going to, where they're coming from. I can see, all of that stuff. So sometimes even more so, it's more beneficial in that late season.
Yeah, absolutely. The leaves are off the trees. Everything, like you said, it's just more visible that time of year, easier to pick that stuff out.
Now, how do you, because here's a big question, and I don't want to get into the where to hunt side of things, but when it comes to scouting, how does what you remember from last year and what you noted from last year determine your scouting process at the beginning of this year? And what I mean by that is, just because, if I've got 40 acres and they were bedded in the back corner of that 40 all year last year, that doesn't mean they're going to be bedded there this year. So I can remember and note, man, every deer was bedded in that back 7 acres last year on that back northwest corner, whatever. But maybe they're not this year. So how does what you remember and what you noted from last year get you started with the new year of scouting? If that makes sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. The one thing that is constant is change, and that there's, that goes for deer hunting as well. Food sources are changing, cover is changing over time, hunting pressure can change. So yeah, you can't rely solely on that for sure. But again, I'm using that after the season's over. I'm taking what I kind of witnessed during the season. And this is particularly true if maybe you haven't been hunting the property long. If you have a 10-year history with the property, then you're probably going to know a lot of this. It's going to be stuff you've seen before along the way. But if not, I may note that, hey, I was kind of expecting the deer to come from this way, but every time I saw, that good buck last year, he came from this way instead, or he was headed off in this direction. And so when I get out there after the season, I'm going to kind of use that opportunity to explore, to maybe get into areas that I normally wouldn't get in during the season, where I thought they might be bedding, that kind of stuff. But I'm going to kind of just keep that stuff in the forefront of my mind, the things I witnessed during the course of the season, and just kind of get out there and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's all it is. You're just trying to, every year you're building on that knowledge base. You're just trying to figure out, what these deer are doing, how they're using the lay of the land, the property, what they're feeding on, where they're bedding, that kind of stuff. And like you said, it's changing. So it's not something you can just go out there and do one time and be able to hunt the property for the next 20 years and know exactly what they're going to do. Because as soon as you think you got them figured out, they'll change up and fool you real quick.
Perfect example. A property that I hunt, I have 10 years of history with this property. No, 8. I have 8 years of history with this property. I know it like the back of my hand. One season I go out and I start some preseason, really just inventory taking, just trying to figure out what has made it, what has not. And the deer were completely different. They were coming from different directions. They were coming at different times of day. Then the last 7 years of hunting history with this property. And I'm like, dude, what in the heck? And so I pull up HuntWise and I'm like trying to look at the maps and I'm like, okay, I don't see anything different. Of course, those don't update every few months. And so I'm like, what in the heck, man? I'm like trying to figure out what's going on. And so I just start driving around to other properties around the property. And one of the neighbors had built a massive, massive pond. And I'm like, well, there you go. Like it completely changed everything about the way my deer acted, because instead of going through my property to get to water, they were having water first before they ever came. Like it just changed everything about the way this property hunted. And so you have to. I think a lot of times guys get frustrated because they fall into hunting memories of a property rather than hunting what the deer are actually doing. Oh, yeah. And they say, well, last year they all came from this direction. Now I keep getting busted by the wind because they're coming from another direction. And I can't, pull out of the property completely and figure out where they're coming from now, where they're going to now, what's changed about the property, what's different about the property. Because sometimes we fall into this rut of like, well, they've always came from this way. Well, it doesn't mean they're always going to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, sometimes it may be something that in your example there, that's not even, it didn't change necessarily on the property you were hunting, but it changed on a neighboring property and it completely impacted what the deer were doing where you hunt. So yeah, sometimes you just got to step back and take a bigger picture look at things and see, because man, it doesn't take a lot of change too to switch those deer up. One year cover can be great in an area and the deer can be bedding in it, and just the growth from that next year, it may change things completely. They may not want to bed in there anymore, or food sources change, so absolutely. It's a constant process. And that's why, and I know we'll probably get into this, but in season scouting is probably as important, if not, or it's more important in my mind than the out of season scouting, because you got to know what the deer are doing at that given point in time. It's great to get out here and scout all year and learn the lay of the land and kind of figure out what the deer have done in the past. But again, just like you've said there, you got to know what they're doing the day you're out there hunting, or otherwise you might not even be in the ball game. Yeah.
And that's why guys like the hunting public are so successful, because they're not afraid to take moves. They're not afraid to make moves and do different things, which they're going to be on the next episode, episode 4 of how to prepare for a whitetail hunt. So they're not afraid to make moves, and they'll see, man, we thought all the deer were coming up this trail. That's the 7th buck we've seen coming up that trail. They'll get out and climb out right then and there and move over and shoot a deer. And sometimes we as whitetail hunters, we fall into that like Midwest, like I can't get out of my tree stand, that mentality. Before we move on, I got to give a quick thank you to my friends over at Arrow Junkie. Arrow Junkie is a one-stop shop for everything you need to build your own arrows. All of the tools that you need to build your own arrows. They also have some incredibly cool swag, which I actually happen to be wearing one of their cool Sasquatch dragging a deer with a recurve in his hand. So they've got some really cool apparel, some really cool tools to build your own arrows. All of the components you need, all the shafts and all the saws and all the jigs, everything you need to build your own arrows. So go check out arrowjunkie.com. I told you I wanted to talk QDMA. So before we get back to scouting, I got a question for you. I believe it was a QDMA article that changed my life forever. It was talking about peeing from your tree stand. I talk often. I haven't talked about it in a while on this podcast. I used to talk often on this podcast about peeing from your tree stand, and not only how it doesn't hurt you, but how I feel as though it benefits you. And the article from QDMA was that basically premise behind it is at the moment that you urinate and the moment a deer urinates, it's 70 some odd % of ammonia. And then within, 7 minutes, it's 100% ammonia. So after 7 minutes, all that deer can smell is that something peed here. Doesn't know if it was a human, doesn't know if it was a deer. Something peed here. And so I started peeing from my tree stand. My whole life I was a pee in a bottle kind of guy, and that just sucks. Because then you got pee all over everything. Anyways.
Yeah.
And so I started even promoting peeing from your tree stand, and the responses I got were outrageous. I would get emails all the time. I would get messages on Instagram all the time. Dude, I peed from my tree, shot a buck 7 minutes later. Dude, I peed from my tree, shot one, 12 minutes later, whatever. It was outrageous the amount of response I got. So is there any truth behind this? As an NDA communications manager, can you communicate to me? That's how I'm going to spin that on you. So you have
there
to.
You go.
Can you communicate to me that there's any truth behind peeing from your tree stand?
Well, I'll be honest. I'm not familiar with that article, but we do.
It was a while ago.
We do have over 1,000 articles on our website, so we got a lot of content on there. And so I can't speak to the science behind that, but what I can tell you is, I do pee from my tree stand. I wish I had a story of a big buck coming in and shooting it right after I peed out of my stand. I don't, I don't have one of those, but what I do have is a lot of anecdotal evidence from, I'm a big believer in mock scrapes. Like I said, I hunt a lot of public ground, so I can't go out there and dump a bag of corn or any kind of attractant to hang a trail camera on. So you have to rely on other stuff, and one of those things is mock scrapes, and I'll make a mock scrape, and I have this time of year, and just dig out a place there in the dirt, the leaves, and make sure you got a good licking branch there, and I'll pee right in that mock scrape. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten pictures that very same day, that evening, put out a mock scrape that day and have pictures of a good buck on it that evening. So in my mind, that I don't believe they can distinguish between human pee and other animals. And it certainly doesn't seem to deter them, if not, attract them, having that fresh urine scent and that scrape. But
oh, absolutely. Biggest deer I've shot to date, I peed it. It was a community scrape, giant scrape. Several hanging branches over, big. And I peed in the tree on my way, or I peed in the scrape on my way in, and maybe 23 minutes later, 24 minutes later, I ended up shooting a giant. I mean, just a giant. Nice. And he went right to that scrape. And he was ticked. You could tell like he's fired up in a big way. Now I think it benefits you too. All they smell is that something has been in this area in the last few minutes, in the last 30 minutes. Something has been in this area, especially in the rut. Something has been here. I know it's pee. It smells just like pee. That's, again, after X amount of minutes. I don't remember the exact science behind it, but X amount of minutes, it's 100% ammonia. All they know is that something peed there. But also, here's what I think people don't think about: the sound. I've had bucks come in while I'm peeing from my tree. All they hear is something peeing. All they hear is pee hitting the ground. They don't know if it's me. They don't know if it's a doe. They don't know. All they hear is something is peeing on the ground. And they come in while I'm peeing. It's happened so many times. I remember thinking, like, the first time, like, oh crap, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? and then I got to where I'm just like, well, I'm just going to keep peeing. All they know is that there's pee hitting the ground. Like, and so, man, I promote it. I'm like, I literally try and pee as many times as I can while I'm hunting, because it makes stuff happen. Like, it makes stuff happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't, I'm like you. For years I carried around the pee bottle, and man, there's nothing worse than having a pee bottle in your pack,
especially when you
your
forget it in your
vehicle.
backpack for a couple weeks.
Yeah. So yeah, it is freeing just being able to go out of the stand. And yeah,
Especially
like you
when
said,
you get kids and then they think it's apple juice in your truck later
oh
on.
no. Yeah.
All right. So how do you implement? We've talked about scouting last season, like remembering what happened last season. Remember what you saw last season. Really, the first thing that you're going to start doing after that is shed hunting. How do you implement? How do you use the sheds that you find? How does that incorporate into your scouting process for I want to kill the deer that drop these? How does that implement your scouting process?
Yeah, that one's kind of tough. I mean, obviously, the one thing it tells you is, hey, this deer survived the season. You know, he's out there somewhere. You know that he was using that area late in the season. Obviously, that was where he was hanging out. Doesn't tell you a lot of information as far as where he might have been early season. But it helps narrow it down. You know that he's using that area, or he was using that area in late winter. It's part of his home range. Depending, it obviously varies greatly from buck to buck, but you have a general idea anyway of where it's part of his home range is. So from there, it's just using, other scouting techniques, trail cameras, that kind of stuff to really try to pinpoint him down and maybe figure out where he's at. But like I said, you do know where he's at late season. Maybe that's his go-to spot because the pressure had been on all season, depending on, the property you were hunting and whether or not it was getting a good bit of pressure. It might give you a hint there of where he's going once the pressure's on. But you still gotta scout and find him, because he may be, a mile from there early season. But he's there, he's alive.
I'm really glad you said that. That was a trick question, because I'm not going to name any names. I hate it when people like find a shed and they're like, I got you. Or, I'm like,
yeah,
like, no, you're far from getting him. All that does for me is tell me the deer I want to know are still around.
Right.
And like you said, the biggest change in my opinion is early season to late season. So what I can remember and what I can note is that, hey, I found this buck late season in this area. So if I want to kill him, I'm going to wait till late season and I'm going to start hunting him in this area. Now, The reason that changes so incredibly much, especially in the Midwest where farming is prevalent, dude, if there's a bean field planted over there early season, those deer are there early season, no doubt. But if they're here and if I've got winter wheat, now I know why that buck was here late season. And so, if the farmer's going to throw up winter wheat again, and then come January, that wheat's going to be popping up, dude, that's where that buck's going to be. So I think it changes so much, but I did want to ask you that because so many people like bank on where they found sheds, like bank on, I got to move my sets over here because I just found the shed for that dude over here. No, that's not how that works.
No.
Now, what are some of you mentioned trail cameras. What are some of the tools you use to scout?
The big one for me, of course, is a mapping app is a lifesaver. I use Onyx. There's, a lot of different ones out there, but man, if it weren't for that, I would never remember where anything was. Because I like I said, I like to scout year round, and I guess it's good and bad. I've gotten into the habit where I mark everything. I mean, I mark everything I find. And so if it weren't for that mapping app, like I said, I couldn't keep up with everything. In the past, I can remember, pre-Onyx, I would go out there and scout late season or in the spring or whatever, find all this stuff. And then season would roll around. And, I think, where was that scrape line I found, postseason, or where did I pick up that shed, or, whatever the case may be. I wouldn't remember half of the intel that I gathered. So now, I make sure everything, like I said, I put it on there, whether it's, a random white oak or red oak that I found out near some cover, or, a persimmon tree, or rubs, whatever it is, I mark it on X, and then I can come back and start kind of look at it from, that 30,000 foot view and try to put those pieces together. Okay, there was some rubs over here, there was a scrape line here, there's some red oaks that they were hitting, over in this area. And just, again, it's just all pieces of the puzzle, trying to figure out what these deer are doing and when they're using the different areas during their course of the season. So that's the biggest thing. And I've always got that tracking feature on anytime I'm out there walking around, so I can go back again and see exactly where I scouted, where I didn't, that kind of thing. Where I can kind of fill in those voids and maybe hit spots after I've been out there a few times and see the spots I missed and the spots I didn't, and that kind of thing. So that's an extremely useful tool for scouting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I get asked that all the time. I get asked, why do you choose HuntWise? Well, that's a pretty simple answer. I choose HuntWise because they offer some incredible discounts inside the maps. I think all the maps are pretty much the same. All maps are really good. I use Onyx for different features. I use Basemap for different things. I use, you name it. But I like HuntWise the best because once you purchase the membership, it pays for itself in discounts. You can get stellar discounts to ScentLock, for instance, but tons of different products you can get big discounts on. That's why I choose them. So all mapping systems work really well. They all serve their purpose. I use features from each. But yeah, so you're absolutely right. There are tons of them and they all work great. Now, one thing that you mentioned there, trees and different terrain features, which are a tool for scouting, in my opinion. If I look at a property and I see, oh, there's a creek right here, that's one of my biggest scouting tools. If I look at a property and I say, man, there is one really high vantage point that I can get to on this property and see the whole thing, that's a scouting tool. Listen, at my in-laws, when they've got the rows of hay out there, that's my biggest scouting tool because I can sit up there and see everything. I can see everywhere the deer come from and go to. That's a scouting tool. So I always start. Let's dive into your early season scouting, preseason scouting. I always start by looking at a map, by looking at an Onyx, a HuntWise, a Go Hunt, Hunt Stand, you name it. I always start by looking at one of those and seeing where should I start with boots on the ground. I want to save time. I don't want to go out there and walk around the whole property and try to look for, walk 10 miles to say, oh, the creek was back here. I could have just started there. Anyways, so I start with that. I start with looking on that. And then it grows from there. So preseason, Brian, where does your scouting process start? How does it start?
Well, I'm the same way. Man, it's ridiculous how much time I spend staring at at those mapping apps, always looking for that overlooked spot, that place I've missed somewhere along the way. But yeah, I use that before I ever step foot on a property just to help me kind of narrow down my efforts once I get out there, boots on the ground, because again, I'm hunting mostly public land. Some of these properties are several thousand acres. I wish I could get out there and learn the whole property in a season, but that's not going to happen. So I try to narrow it down to the places I think would produce the best opportunity for getting on deer. So I'm looking for any types of converging habitat or those transition zones, like a lot of people call them, places where two or more habitat types come together. Deer are creatures of edge, so they'll use those different habitat types and travel along those edges. I'm looking for any kind of thick cover on there because that's where the deer are gonna be bedding typically. And here in the southeast, a lot of times that's looking for clear cuts, places that have been logged or thinned heavily, overgrown fields, that kind of thing. Making notes of that type of habitat. And then, there's different terrain features you can look for as well. Things like, saddles or low spots in a ridge or a low spot where two ridges meet, those traditional saddles. You hear a lot of people talk about that, but still think those are great locations. Not necessarily every one of them, but they can be good spots to ambush a deer. Places where maybe multiple ridges or ridge fingers all kind of converge into one drainage. I've heard that referred to as a crow's foot or a travel hub, but those type of terrain features can be great places to key in on. And I'm just marking spots on the map, and so I can get out there and put boots on the ground and actually look at it and see if the sign's there. Once I get out there, a lot of times the places that I think look just jam up on the map, you'll get out there and it won't be what you had hoped it was going to be, but maybe 200 yards from there, you find that spot, so it's never just, okay, these are the 10 spots. I'm going to go out there and kill a deer in one of these, but it just narrows it down. I just look for those features that would attract deer that can narrow down my boots on the ground scouting.
Yeah. Now, one thing, and I don't want to contradict you, and I don't even want to contradict myself. Let me just note this. We are saying we start with those terrain features. So many times guys get stuck in their head. Well, this is a creek running into I have to hunt here. It's a natural pinch point. I have to hunt. This is where they're at. And then they see deer crossing over here every day that they hunt. And they're like, no. This, they get stuck on the terrain features. That's where we start, is what we're saying. Don't get stuck in, well, on paper, this is where the deer should be. On paper, this is exactly where I should be hunting. Because like we've talked about, deer are completely different. They literally are a different animal. And so you have to adapt, and you cannot get stuck in your ways of this is where they all were last year, or on paper. I listened to a podcast of Dylan and Brian, and they said, different terrain features, and that's what I'm looking at. You still have to look at where the deer are coming from and where the deer are going. Oh, yeah. And hey, listen, there's been times, Brian, where I've sat in a spot and I've had buddies like come by and they'll like, be on my property, and they're like, dude, that's where you set up at? Dude, there's a ridge right up here. The deer will be, and I'm like, you don't know my property. Like, yeah, I know there's a ridge right up there, but I've shot 4 deer here in the last 4 years. Like, this is where the deer are at. And so you just have to look at your property, where are the deer at, be ready to adapt, be ready to change, and make those moves. Now, boots on the ground. When you get boots on the ground, how do you start implementing your what you saw and found on Onyx? How do you start implementing those things? The biggest thing that I do is I just find the highest place on the property, observation set. And like I said, sometimes that's a corn, not corn. Sometimes that's a hay bale, sitting on top of a hay bale with a pair of binoculars and just watching for an evening or a morning and seeing where they're coming from and where they're going. But I absolutely, for me, observation sits are the most valuable thing I can do. Way away from all the deer. I'm not gonna booger them. They're not gonna smell me. They're not gonna see me. They're not gonna know I'm in the area. And I can watch them, and I can just see where they're going and where they're coming from. Sometimes it's on a different property. Sometimes it's getting 500 yards away on a different property and sitting on some dude's water tower or silo or something. But again, I get far enough away to not booger up any deer, and I can see where they're coming from and where they're going. Noting, and I might look through my binoculars and see where they're coming from, where they're going, pull up my maps and say, oh yeah, I marked a creek back in there. That's where they're coming out of there at. Or, oh yeah, he found that, acorns. We found acorns back there last year. That's exactly where they're coming out on that point at, so on and so forth. So I'll look through my binoculars, see where they're coming from, where they're going, pull up my map, see what I've marked, what I've noted, and then piece it all together. But after you've looked at your maps, what are the first steps you begin to take in scouting a property?
Well, I'll try to have, by the time I head out there, boots on the ground, I'll try to have a handful of spots that I've picked out from the map. Again, looking at the habitat features, terrain features. I'm looking at access stuff too on public land. Obviously, I don't want to be right there hunting by the access. Well, that depends if the access is getting overlooked. But in most cases, I'm not going to be, hunting a food plot 200 yards from the parking area, because
Yeah.
that's where everybody and their brother is going to be, So that factors in as well. I'm trying to get off the beaten path and get away from the pressure. But so I've got these spots picked out. I've marked them. And like I mentioned earlier, very rarely do I get out there, walk to one of those spots and think, yep, this is it. This is where I need to hang a stand.
100%. A lot of times it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, never mind. This isn't what I thought it was. And that's fine.
Yeah, and that's okay too. If you can eliminate some spots, and then you're one step closer to kind of figuring things out. So yeah, I'll hit those spots as kind of my starting locations, see if it's what I was hoping it would be. And then I just kind of go from there, based on what I see in that spot. I might get there, maybe it looked thick on the map, and I get there and it wasn't near as thick as I thought it was going to be at ground level. So from that point, thicker.
Never mind. I can't even get in here.
So I just explore from there. If there's trails or something I can follow, I just start, or I might, depending on if my other spots are in walking distance from there, I might just go from one to the other, but I just kind of spread out from there and start walking, looking for the sign that I want to find. I'm looking for, good cover. I'm making note again of everything, but I'm looking for potential food sources depending on when I'm thinking I might hunt this area. Whether that's, again, soft mass like persimmons or muscadines down here in the South, or, whether I'm noting red oaks and white oaks and that kind of stuff in the area. Not a lot of agriculture where I'm at here in West Central Georgia. Some food plots scattered here and there, but not the big ag fields that you might encounter in the Midwest. So that's not really in play for me. But, I'm taking all that stuff into consideration. I'm not necessarily at this point, I'm not worried about fresh sign. Again, like we were talking about earlier, the fresh sign you need on the day you're hunting it, or, when you go in there to hunt it, that's when you're looking for that fresh sign. At this point, I'm just learning. I'm learning the lay of the land. I'm learning where the cover is, where the food sources are. If I can see some deer trails or that kind of thing, then that's great too. But again, it could be a trail that they're absolutely wearing out at the time I'm scouting it, and it may not be worth, a dang once deer season rolls in. So you just have to keep that in mind. But, initially I'm learning the property, I'm learning the terrain, the habitat, that kind of thing. And then I'm trying to kind of put the pieces in of how the deer may be using that at any given point in the season. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, again, I think one of the biggest things is being able to quickly adapt and change and make moves. And, a perfect example is that exactly what you just said is sometimes we show up to a property and we're like, no, wait, this is where I need to be. Like, this is, I could tell this is what needs to happen. And it's just not what needs to happen at the time. And so we just have to be able to quickly adapt in those times. During season, as you begin hunting, as seasons start opening up, you cannot lose the mindset of scouting and understanding your deer. Now, I know my primary focus is that hunt. My primary focus is killing deer. My primary focus is being still and being quiet and waiting. But I'm always observing deer. I'm always observing where are they coming from? Where are they going? What are they doing? How are they acting? I had no idea that the prominent wind in this area was south. And now that I've sit out here for, 2 weeks or a month, 90% of the time it's a south wind. So I have to change everything about what I do. You have to continue to observe what's going on around you. So as you're hunting, what things are you looking for in order to better pursue the deer?
Yeah, this is something that I've really had to work on the last few years. And you mentioned the hunting public guys earlier, and that have definitely, it's something I've picked up from them among other folks, that other hunters who are much better than I am that I've learned from along the way. But it's just all about that most recent sign. It's about the fresh sign. You got to stay on that. the whole season long, because just like you were talking about earlier, man, for years and years, I was so bad about, I'd do my scouting and I'd find this place that in my mind was the perfect spot. Maybe there's good cover, there's food source. This is where the deer are going to be. And so I would just wear that spot out with the mentality that sooner or later, a good one's going to come through here. This is too good of a spot. If I just sit here long enough, something good's going to come through here.
Right.
And that can work on occasion, but you're much better off to get out there and constantly be looking for that fresh sign. If there's not fresh sign there, the deer aren't using it. Why are you going to waste to sit there? And so, I've tried to get a lot better about scouting. Scouting don't end when the season starts. You got every hunt, you should be kind of scouting your way in. You can have a spot in mind where you're going to go. That's fine. But, let the sign dictate whether or not you get to that spot. You might find great sign before you ever get to the place you intended to hunt, or you might get all the way to the place you intended to hunt and you're just not seeing the sign. There's no fresh tracks. I don't see any droppings. They haven't been feeding under this oak tree that I really thought they'd be feeding under. Man, you just, and this is hard for me because you always have that drive. You want to get in a tree, especially if you're hunting in the evening and you see the clock ticking, you think, man, it's going to be dark here in a few hours. I got to get in a tree. But I think you're better off, even if you have to burn the whole hunt, you're better off to keep moving and keep looking for that most recent sign, that fresh sign to tell you, hey, this is where the deer are at now. And if you can't find it, man, just, like I said, you might have to burn a hunt and try plan B the next day, go somewhere different until you can find that spot.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You talk about burning days. One of the biggest lessons I learned, and it was just this past year, is the value of burning a day of hunting in order to scout. It was middle of the rut, and I thought I had this property completely, fully nailed down, and it was just becoming frustrating. I'm like, dude, all the deer, they're not doing what I thought they would be doing. They're not acting how I thought I'd be acting, but it's the middle of the rut. Like, I can't move. I can't change. I can't. And I told myself, I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I've boogered up enough deer in here. So I'm going to back out for a week. And I was calling friends and like, dude, there was 180 plus deer in there. And they're like, dude, you can't. It's the middle of the rut. Dude, he could show up at any time. I'm like, I know, but I've boogered enough deer in there. So I'm going to pull out for a week. And I'm going to let everything rest about this place. Let the deer calm down, let them settle down. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to spend 2 days up on top of the hill, just watching. And so I burned, I didn't burn I burned 5 days of not going out there at all, 2 days of sitting on the hill. So for 7 days, I pulled out of this place and I sat on top of the hill the last 2 days. And then it was like a light switch. I'm like, they're all coming from there. And I couldn't see where they're coming from. So it looked like, anyways, I'm like, that's where they're coming from. That's where they're coming out at. And so I moved a blind, set it up, killed a buck the next night. It was just, and it was one of those lessons where it was like, dude, you have to be okay. I told myself, you have to be okay with burning a couple hunting days to scout. Because here's what happens is, especially my place in Oklahoma, I hunt with Liberty Ranch Outfitters there in Oklahoma, 6,000 acres. 6,000 acres can become a lot to understand, especially when you're only there a few days a week, or a few days a year. And so I tell myself, I'm like, I got 10 days here. I got to go in and hunt. I got to hit it hard. I got to do things. And then the idea of burning a day is like outrageous. You're like, no, dude, I've only got 10 days here. But how beneficial will the last 9 days be, or the last 8 days be, if you spend the first day or two scouting? How much more beneficial? It'll make it so less frustrating. It'll make it so less aggravating. And the last 8 days will be more beneficial than a full 10 days of trying to figure it out in a tree.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, would you rather burn 3 or 4 days scouting and have 3 or 4 really good hunts, or would you rather sit there all week, get to hunt every evening and not see anything that you want to shoot? It's just it's kind of give and take. It's a sacrifice, but I think it's worthwhile. Now, I do want to say, because you made a good point there about your scenario. Most of what I'm talking about here is based on my experience, which is hunting typically fairly large blocks of public land. You can move around. The guy that's only got maybe the 40 acres next door to hunt, it's going to be a different scenario. Obviously, you don't want to get out there and be scouting that every day, walking the entire 40 acres, necessarily looking for fresh sign every single day. You're going to blow the deer out of there. So you got to, again, it all depends on your circumstances. In a situation like that, if you only have a small property or something, then, and the property, then it's just more of like you did there. You sit back and wait for ideal conditions maybe, and get in there and strike when everything is perfect. And otherwise you might want to stay out of there. That's
absolutely.
where it's nice to have that public land, even if you got the small tract. I got 15 acres that I bought a couple of years ago that I hunt here, right, that my house is on. But that's just for when everything's right. A good buck might show up or whatever the case may be. I can get back there and try to kill it. But otherwise, I'm out on public land, roaming public land, finding new spots. And if you booger up one area, I can just move on to the next. So
yeah,
it's all based on your circumstances.
That's me more times than I like to admit. Oh, I've messed this place up. Let's go find a new one.
Yeah, it happens.
More times than I'd like to admit. One thing I want to note too is when you're trying to get somebody involved in hunting, scouting is a great way to do that. Because, if I take my 4-year-old out to sit in a blind, I'm like, dude, quit talking. Dude, quit moving. Dude, you got to quit eating your Cheetos. Quit. And I'm constantly telling him, we're not here to have fun. We're here to sit still and be quiet. And so he gets that negative in his mindset, a negative idea of hunting.
Yeah.
But if I take him out to scout, and I take him out to find sheds, and I take him out and I make a big deal about a scrape, and I make a big deal about a rub, and I make a big deal about tracks. Now my son will be walking anywhere and be like, Dad, a deer track. Holy cow, dude, look, a deer was right here. And I'm like I make a big deal about those things, because then he's excited about scouting. He's excited about the idea of deer hunting. And so scouting is a great way to get kids involved in the process of hunting. And then when you do take them hunting, it's like, remember, bud, we saw that scrape over here, so let's watch that area and maybe we'll see deer over there. And then they do, and they're like, oh my gosh, dude, we saw deer over there. We saw a scrape over there. Now there's deer. And it just ties it all together for them. So get kids involved in the scouting process. It will help them get involved in the hunting process. So that's just a dad tip, I guess. Brian, I ask every guest of mine. Fred Bear was big on his field notes. He was big on sharing his field notes. And so I ask every guest, what's one field note you've learned over the years? What's one tip or trick that I can take and put in my back pocket and make myself a better deer hunter with?
Oh, I guess my big
Pee from
tip,
a tree.
Huh?
Pee from a tree.
My big tip, because it was one that took me so long to learn myself, is to get out of the pretty woods. And again, it's particularly for public land hunters, but for so long I wanted to hunt those big, pretty mature hardwoods.
Yeah.
That's where the deer are going to be. It's dropping raining acorns in here. That's where the deer are going to be. And I can get in here, I can see 200 yards in any direction. And man, when I learned to start getting away from that kind of stuff and getting tight to the cover, where these deer are actually spending their time, where they're bedding and where they feel safe and secure, that's when my success really started going up. So that's probably one of the biggest things I would say for somebody new coming into it, is just, be where the deer want to be. And that's where that's where the scouting comes in, is figuring out where the deer want to be. But it's typically not in those wide open, pretty hardwoods, not during daylight hours anyway.
Yeah. No, think about this. And we're going to talk about this more in the Where to Hunt episode. But think about this. If you can see 200 yards in any direction, that means the deer can see 200 yards in any direction. And that means the coyotes can see 200 yards in any direction. And the deer know the coyotes can see me better in this area. And the deer know that the hunters can see me better in this area. And the deer know I'm more vulnerable in this area. So think about it in that I always tell people, think like a human. And they're like, what? And I'm like, think like a human. Like if I was being hunted, I'm not going to be standing out in the middle of the field where I can see for 400 yards in every direction. I'm going to be tucked away hiding. If I'm being hunted, if I'm hungry, where am I going to be? I'm going to be in the stinking food. If I'm cold, where am I going to be? I'm going to be snuggled up in a hole somewhere. So think like a human, and then it makes hunting way easier. And so, absolutely, man, that phenomenal tip. My tip is pee from a tree.
There you go. That works too.
Kicking off the deer series, I got to start promoting it again. Guys, pee from your tree. Send me a picture of your dead deer after you pee from a tree. Brian, thank you so much for coming on. Before we go, I got to give a quick shout out to my friends over at the John V. Mesh Memorial Scholarship. I'm very picky about what nonprofits that I promote and that I support, and the John V. Mesh Memorial Scholarship is one of those. They hold events around the country to get kids involved in the outdoors. They also, through those events, they're raising money to give a scholarship to a student every year who's looking to go into a conservation occupation. So I would highly recommend you to check out the John V. Mesh Memorial Scholarship at johnvmesh.org. I would highly recommend you donate. If you know a student who's going into a conservation occupation, I would very highly recommend you to get the applicant entered to win on their website to win that scholarship, because it's a phenomenal scholarship and help you pay for your schooling. What's better than that? So go check out the John V. Mesh Memorial Scholarship at johnvmesh.org. Brian, thank you so much for coming on, man. I greatly appreciate it. Guys, make sure and tune in next week for episode 3, where we talk about where to hunt, because like we've talked about, where we've scouted isn't always where we hunt, and what we've scouted isn't always going to be what we hunt. So make sure and tune back in next week to hear Brian Murphy, Jared Stubbs, and Josh Stubbs from Elevate Stand Company when we talk about where to hunt. Brian, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, thank you for listening. You guys have a fantastic week. Good luck this fall. As always, I would love to share in your success with you. So make sure and shoot your images, your harvest photos over to me on Instagram. You can email them to me, send them to the Bear Archery page. Make sure I want to see those harvest photos. So send them in. Thanks for listening. You guys have a great week.